It's summer. And when I'm getting ready to go outside, there's one thing I can't forget. Sunscreen. I mean, look at me. I need to wear sunscreen. And sometime in the last few years, I jumped on a social media bandwagon and started buying sunscreen not from the US, but from other countries. From Japan, France, Australia, and especially from South Korea. Sunscreens that the internet told me were better than the ones made in the US, where I live.
We are basically living in the sunscreen stone age here in America.
The problem is that in Europe and Asia, they have much better ingredients.
So much better than the ones in the US.
So much better than the US.
The difference was noticeable. American sunscreens could be greasy, smelly, and even painful. Ow. And these weren't. They made wearing sunscreen easy and comfortable, so I used them for years. But then one day, they disappeared.
Have you noticed that some of your favorite Korean sunscreens have just vanished?
Sunscreens have been pulled from shelves in the
US
US.
government has been cracking down on cosmetics.
All over the internet, people living in the US are frustrated because the world's best sunscreens with the most effective and comfortable and up-to-date formulas aren't available here. Here in a country where the rates of skin cancer are steadily on the rise. It's now the single most common cancer in America. 1 in 5 Americans will get some kind of skin cancer by the time we're 70. We know exactly how to reduce the risk of skin cancer, but in the US, we apparently just don't have the best products to do it. Why not? What exactly is wrong with the sunscreen in this country? And what happened to the good stuff?
I understand that wearing sunscreen is the responsible, healthy thing to do, but I never thought too much about how it works. And that felt like a good place to start. So I did some reading. So there are 2 kinds of sunscreen. First, there are sunscreens that use chemical filters, aka organic sunscreens. These are absorbed into the skin where they absorb UV rays and use a chemical reaction to convert that into harmless heat. When you see ingredients in the US like avobenzone, homosalate, octosalate, octocrylene, those are chemical filters. Then there are sunscreens that use physical filters, aka mineral sunscreens or inorganic sunscreens. These sit on top of the skin where they absorb UV rays but also reflect them. When you see ingredients in the US like titanium dioxide or zinc oxide, those are physical filters. Some of these physical filters can be a little bit more visible on the skin. Generally, though, sunscreen creates a protective layer that's invisible to the human eye, but visible if you can get your hands on a camera designed to see it. Okay, I've been setting up this camera, but before we get to that, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video. Sponsors are how we do this journalism that makes stories like this one possible. Something disturbing happens when you Google your name. You start to find site after site claiming to know quite a lot about you. These sites are data brokers. They buy your data without your consent and sell it to anybody who's willing to pay. Contact information, address history, job history, possible neighbors, possible associates, criminal and traffic records, bankruptcies. It's really invasive stuff, and I've had personal experience with this, Googling myself and finding a lot more information out there than I thought was available. That's why I've started using Aura, who's sponsoring this video. It's a service that identifies data brokers selling your information on the internet and gets them to take it down. Sites like these are legally required to remove your data if you ask them to, but they make the entire process of asking very difficult. Aura handles that entire process for you, not just one time, but continuously. Aura also comes with a VPN and a password manager. It's a whole bunch of great products in one. And if anything does happen, you're covered with up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. You can go to the link at the description, aura.com/Christophe, to get your first 14 days of Aura for free. Okay, that's it. Now I really want to show you this crazy little camera. Okay, let's see if this works. Oh my God. So this is a UV camera. Jesus. It picks up ultraviolet light, which are the rays just outside of the visible light spectrum, and they are also the rays that cause skin damage. Damaged skin absorbs more of that UV light, so it shows up as darker patches on this camera, while on this camera, Those patches are mostly invisible. I guess my glasses also block UV light, which I did not realize. This camera can show me all of this sun damage that's invisible to the naked eye. And it can also show me how sunscreen protects against that damage. Just like objects that absorb visible light show up as black on a regular camera, and objects that reflect visible light show up as white. Since chemical sunscreen absorbs UV light, it shows up as black on a UV camera. Let's see. Whoa. And since physical sunscreen reflects UV light, it shows up as white. Whoa. So like these look the same to me, but a UV camera can see the difference. Okay, so that's what sunscreen does to UV light, but not all UV light is the same. There are two major types. First are UVB rays. These burn the surface of your skin. And then there are longer wavelength UVA rays that deeply penetrate the skin. Both UVA and UVB contribute to aging and to developing cancer. Different sunscreen ingredients absorb different ranges of those UV wavelengths. One sunscreen ingredient might absorb this range of UV light, while another might absorb more UVB, and another might absorb more UVA. But by combining those ingredients, you can protect against a broader range of the UV spectrum than with one ingredient alone. When you see broad spectrum on a label, it means that that sunscreen absorbs UV rays across the spectrum, UVA and UVB. This, of course, is a very simplified version. When you look at real sunscreen ingredient absorption charts, it gets more complicated. I needed to talk to a scientist who could help me make sense of this.
It's Michelle from Lab Muffin Beauty Science, Chemistry PhD, Cosmetic Chemist, and Sunscreen Connoisseur. I'm Michelle Wong of Lab Muffin Beauty Science. Let me start that again. I'm Dr. Michelle Wong of Lab Muffin Beauty Science. I'm a chemistry PhD and science communicator, and I've been talking about the science behind beauty products for over a decade.
I reached out to Michelle to better understand what makes American sunscreen different on a chemical level.
If you look at the graph, the higher it is on the graph, the more protection you're getting. The wider it is on the graph, the more wavelengths it's protecting against. So avobenzone is super high, zinc oxide is really low. The US only really has about 6 or 7 commonly used chemical sunscreen filters. In Europe, Korea, Japan, Australia, we have a lot more. And that means, from the formulation point of view, you can make much more elegant products that don't have a lot of the drawbacks of the older filters. So one of the big issues in the US is a lot of sunscreens don't block out the longer wavelengths of UV, the UVA.
Poor UVA protection. It's a metric that isn't really reflected in the number that we're most used to seeing on sunscreen packaging, sun protection factor, or SPF. SPF just measures what proportion of the sun's radiation is making it through to your skin. But it's actually only a measure of how well a sunscreen protects against sunburn, so it only refers to defense against UVB rays. So 2 SPF 50 sunscreens can protect against UVB, roughly the same, and then have very different levels of UVA protection. Both of these sunscreens pass US standards, but while this one passes EU standards, this one, because of this big dip in UVA protection, doesn't. And then there's the second issue with American sunscreen.
I think the second issue is probably the bigger one. Most of the time when you talk to people like, why don't you wear sunscreen more? The biggest issue is actually wearability. Like they hadn't found one that was comfortable to wear, that didn't break them out, that didn't sting their eyes. With the newer filters, you can get much more comfortable sunscreens. You can get stuff that people don't find irritating, that don't break people out, that feel basically like a moisturizer.
When you do coverage of your favorite sunscreens of the year, are American sunscreens ever in that consideration, or are they always like not even in the running?
Generally, they're not. I did do like a review of popular American sunscreens at some point, and like, it was pretty sad.
Michelle helped me understand what it is we're missing. More comfortable, wearable sunscreens that are also more effective. But I still didn't really understand why. Okay, it's time to read some FDA documents. In Europe and a bunch of countries in Asia, sunscreens are regulated as cosmetics, which means that new ingredients can make it onto store shelves relatively quickly. But in the US, sunscreen is regulated as an over-the-counter drug, so it undergoes much closer scrutiny than cosmetics. Now, sunscreen is also regulated as a drug in Australia, which does have the latest and greatest UV filters, so that isn't the whole answer. The whole answer has to do with specifically how the US regulates over-the-counter drugs. To introduce a new sunscreen ingredient in the US, you have to apply to get it on what's called the over-the-counter monograph for sunscreen drugs. You can think of this like a recipe book that limits itself to a very small set of ingredients. Sunscreen sold in the US can only be made with what is in that recipe book. But getting a new ingredient onto that list is difficult. A company applying to do that has to conduct tests that include animal studies and human clinical trials. It's rigorous and time-consuming, and it's expensive. And that cost falls entirely on the company submitting the application. So most don't even bother to try. Not everyone, though. And I was able to talk to someone at one company that is trying.
This goes back a long time ago. Before you were born, probably.
Fair enough. Carl De Ruiz is a senior manager at DSM Firmenich. He spent the last 20 years trying to get the FDA to approve bimetrizanol, a UV filter widely used in European and Asian sunscreens.
I was working at Ciba Specialty Chemicals, and we actually created the molecule in the 90s. It was actually approved in Europe around 2000, 2001.
You can see here that bimetrizanol provides a high level of coverage across the spectrum. Right now, avobenzone is the only ingredient in the US that can put up a fight against UVA rays, and bimetrizanol would be the second. As of making this video, it's still undergoing review.
We're very excited that finally we'll have one new filter, but given the current way this is being regulated, I seriously doubt that anybody's going to follow given the current paradigm that FDA imposes on companies in order to get this done.
The result of making it so hard to introduce new ingredients is that while places like the European Union have over 30 approved UV filters, the US only has 16. Only about half of those are still actually used, and the last time a new one was approved was 1999. There's better sunscreen abroad. Sunscreen with more updated ingredients that works better and feels better. And this chart of search interest in Korean sunscreen helps explain where I first started experiencing this story, because at some point, Americans started to figure all of this out.
They have filters that are different that we can't get in the US.
We can't get these in the US.
They can't sell it in the US because of the regulations.
International sunscreens, formulated with UV filters that weren't yet approved by the FDA, went viral, especially those from South Korea. South Korean cosmetics exports to the US more than tripled in 5 years. The problem is that selling Americans sunscreen with UV filters that weren't approved by the FDA was never exactly legal, and eventually enforcement caught up. In 2022, the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act significantly expanded the FDA's authority to regulate cosmetics. International brands selling sunscreens in the US had 2 years to stop labeling their products as sunscreen. Some brands chose to reformulate their viral sunscreens with the older FDA-approved UV filters.
This is the US version.
This is the new American version.
This is the American version with American filters approved by the FDA.
Others pulled out of the US market entirely. So that's what I experienced this year. I was using sunscreens that were not FDA approved, and a new American law gave the FDA the power to take them off of shelves.
It's banned. The Korean sunscreen is banned.
And our favorite Korean sunscreen.
This is like one of my favorite sunscreens right now. I'm so sad.
Some are continuing to find ways to get international sunscreen through third-party sellers, which is how I got my hands on some. But it's unclear if those sellers will keep selling to people in the US long term. Not to mention that third-party sellers can also expose buyers to fakes. So what will it take for sunscreen in the US to catch up to sunscreen in the rest of the world? There have been multiple efforts in Congress to speed up the process of approving new sunscreen ingredients, none of which yet have actually led to us getting better sunscreen. But some experts say that the answer might lie in this part of the process: animal testing. Not only does animal testing add time to the overall application process, it also means that any company based somewhere where animal testing for cosmetics is banned, like the European Union, can't apply to introduce a new sunscreen drug in the US at all. And there's some reason to be optimistic here. In April 2025, the FDA announced a plan to reduce animal testing requirements for certain drugs, and to replace it with computer simulations, and even testing on lab-grown human tissue. The FDA also claimed that it would start using safety data from other countries with comparable regulatory standards, meaning that the European and Asian companies using the sunscreen ingredients that many of us have come to know and love might soon be able to seek approval in the US. The story of US sunscreen is a story of how being too cautious in protecting public health can unintentionally harm it. We're told to wear sunscreen, and we know that it works. But in the US, we're still waiting, 26 years and counting, for better tools to do it right. And until that changes, the rest of the world will keep protecting their skin a whole lot better than we do.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Thank you again so much to Michelle and to Carl for sharing their expertise. You should absolutely go check out Michelle's channel at Lab Muffin Beauty Science. She does a bunch of very cool, very approachable explainers about the chemistry of cosmetics. Highly recommend. We're doing something a little bit different for next month's video. We are publishing a video, but it's not going to be on this channel. So stay tuned. Okay, see you around.